You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 Goth Talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we have guest DJ Cyberpagan joining us all the way from Germany, who has DJ'd all over Germany and the UK and regularly travels to participate in Goths shows and events across Europe. We're going to be talking about Germany specifically, though, and the intricacies of the interaction between various subcultures like cybergoth and the Romantigoths and death rock and gothic rock. We're going to talk about German music and the German music scene. Of course, Wave-Gotik Treffen will be brought up. We'll be discussing club culture, talking about the international goth community on Twitch and how that has created a brand new scene, and sharing some stories from our childhoods, strangely enough. So I'm really excited to have you here with us. As always, I am your host, Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host, Trey. Why don't we get started with introductions? So, DJ Cyberpagan, thank you for being here with us. Can you tell us a little about when you were first introduced to goth, why that was interesting to you, why that has remained relevant to you over the years, and share a little about your DJ history as well?
Basically, like in the mid 80s, age like 15, 16, I was more like a 80s rock fan. I was a huge U2 fan in the late 80s. And in 1987, a schoolmate gave me a copy of Floodland by the Sisters and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me by The Cure. And I thought, well, that's interesting music. That's actually really nice. So I ended up buying more stuff by those bands and discovering even more bands. When after making my driving license in 1987, I first got into a club where they actually played goth music, because there was no such club in the town where I grew up. And I thought, well, there's more of this music, which is nice. And yeah, it just grew from there, basically. So it wasn't like one day I wasn't goth, the next day I was the uber goth or something. It was just like, and also for me, it was always more about the music than about the actual goth fashion thing. That I always liked to dress rather just like plain black or something, even before I even heard of the Sisters. And so basically, nothing much changed since then, apart from just discovering loads of more bands.
Right, yeah.
So what made me feel at home? What wasn't so much the people at first, because it took me a while to actually get to know anyone. It was more like really the music that grabbed me.
Mm-hmm. Is that why you started DJing?
No, that came much later, in fact. That was like, I was just collecting records and CDs and sometimes doing mixtapes for some friends. And one day there was a gig here, even after I moved to the town where I'm living now, there was a gig by Goethes Erben scheduled. And a friend was hosting it, co-hosting it with the club owner, and he turned to me and said, I know you got a lot of CDs, you like doing those mixtapes. Would you care about DJing after the gig? Because I have to take care of the band and the lights and stuff like that. So, and I said, yeah, why not? So I just dived head first into it, basically after Goethes Abend gig, which was as a sold-out club.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that was your first one?
Yeah,
wow.
I was so terrified the night before, like, oh, I hope everything goes right. In fact, even just 10 minutes before I went on, the band was already packing, and my CD case had ended up on the band's trailer because I had the same kind of cases. So I ran out again. Oh, sorry, but these are my CDs, actually. But in the end, it went well, and that was in January or February 2002.
Wow.
And from in April, he asked me then if from May on I don't want to be the second resident DJ at the club night every month.
Wow.
So I thought, well, yeah, why not? And then the club closed, and I asked him if we just moved to another club. That made me an offer, but he actually lost a bit the drive to do it. So I teamed up with another guy. We're doing like 2 floors, 1 floor for me and 1 floor for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me until 2004 to have my own proper club night. And that went on until 2010. And since then, I'm just doing stuff with other people together. I'm still looking for a club around here to have my own night again, at least like twice a year or something. Could be nice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, nobody has a club night right now.
No, of course.
Unfortunately.
Of course. No, but actually, I'm looking for a club the past three or 4 years. I'm looking now again.
Right.
Many clubs have their like fixed schedule, like every first month, Saturday of the month we have this, and it's just hard to get in if you don't want to do something at least once a month.
It's similar in Chicago, where you have a few DJs who everybody knows that run most of the events. I do think Scary Lady Sarah has had nights before where she invites a brand new DJ to play. Trey, I don't know if you remember, but I think she's done stuff like that before.
She has nice. One-off type night things. I think some of her Noctronica nights, sometimes she's had guests and stuff like that. But certainly, she might have done some with a full Nocturna. At least I know when she has like a band or other acts, sometimes they'll do a little bit of DJing as well. But I think it's pretty much her night.
Yeah, and I think for Nocturne, it's mostly that if some other DJs comes, it's more like somebody from overseas that is a bit more well known already, like Martin Oldgoth or so.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem, you can tell me how it is in your city, but part of the problem too is you can only have a small number of dedicated events because there aren't a million people, that would go to them.
Absolutely. There was a time in the early 2000s when the whole like the new kind of death rock hype came up in the early 2000s with Cinema Strange and bands like that. Basically, you had like those little old school goth nights popping up all over the place, and there were just too many. And then you had like cities of 40,000 people having two club nights at the same day. And of course, it just couldn't last. So that's why when I started, I thought, okay, like 2, maybe 4 times a year, and that's enough. And I still have clashes.
Well, let me ask you about, because I want to talk more about clubbing and music and stuff. But you did bring up not being as interested in fashion, and I don't like asking the question, how do you define goth? But when I was thinking about how people understand goth from an outsider looking at the German scene, a lot of the most extreme fashion that I see comes from Germany. So it made me wonder if a lot of people are into the scene more for the fashion than the music.
I think many people actually are. That I think usually there's a big portion of the people dropping out after 3 or 4 years again for something else. Might just have been there because they like the looks and like the festivals, going there, hanging out with people, and then they got bored of it and went to search for the next fashions thing, maybe. But the other thing is, like, what defines goth? The big question that's going around for 30 years. We know the sisters are not. But what I think is that there is no such thing as a goth scene anyway. I mean, it's always been like some big bucket of various sub-scenes being thrown in. You have like this old school post-punk, you have the new wave people, EBM, industrial, neo-folk, whatever. And it's all under the big name of goth. If you have a goth festival, you will find probably pretty much everything of that in there. Right. And another thing here, especially here in Germany or Central Europe as all, in general, is those medieval rock bands.
Yeah.
They're basically, some of them more or less sounds like Rammstein with bagpipes, as I always put it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's.
I mean, each to their own. It's just not my cup of tea. But it's very diverse. Music-wise, and also fashion-wise, because of course the people dress differently.
Right. Depending what kind of music they prefer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that related to that term, Schwarze Scene? Where is that the same idea?
Yeah, pretty. I think Schwarze Scene is pretty much what you would call the goth scene in English. It's just basically the translation.
Oh, okay.
There was a term in the 1980s, before I even heard the term goth for the first time, where we were just called the wavers. Because of the new wave.
Right.
Oh, those people listening to new wave, those are wavers. And then you have the German word Grufti, which is basically a goth.
Yeah.
And also, actually, I first came across the term goth in the monthly, I think it was a monthly or quarterly newsletter of the Mission Fan Club in about 1989 or something. Because they had great. Some ads like boy seeks girl and something, and like male goth, and I was what, male goth, female goth, what is goth? And I looked up. Oh, okay, Grufties. I see. So I actually had to look it up back then, and the word just came to be used in Germany much later.
Right. So that's interesting because I think in my experience, when you have a bigger city or a bigger country, the subcultures are more divided. So you have a goth night, whereas like maybe I've talked to people in New Zealand and they say if you have an event, it's a general alternative event. So the metalheads and the goths and everybody go. But you're saying that it's very similar to like Wave Gothic Treffen, where it's the steampunks and the cyber goths and
not exactly. If you only come to Germany for the big festivals like Mira Luna, Amphi, Wave Gothic Treffen, you will think, oh yeah, Germany, the paradise of the goth scene. But in fact, half of the people are from elsewhere.
Right.
If you look into the various cities, I think it's not much difference between the German scene and like UK or US scene. Probably you have in the smaller towns there will probably be the one goth in the village or something, and who will have to drive for an hour to get to a decent club. And of course, in cities like Berlin, you have loads of people and several clubs. Many people actually move to Leipzig because of Wave Gothic Treffen, but in fact, if you go to Leipzig at every other time of the year, you have a few clubs which are actually quite good, maybe above average for Germany even, from the numbers. But Leipzig is quite like a student city, very alternative in general. So people feeling good there. So of course the nights can survive better in a city of the same size in another part of Germany, maybe. Because I can compare it to the city of Hanover, which is close to where I live, which is roughly the same size as Leipzig. And there you have like one club that does regular goth, two clubs that do regular goth nights, then one night where I'm taking part in, which is every 2 months, and then another club that occasionally does something, and that's pretty much it. And the rest is just like 80s nights or something. It's more mainstream then.
Okay. Well, so I know you on your streams mostly play gothic rock. Are those clubs, those goth clubs, do they mix everything? Like, do they play EBM and industrial too?
Some of them are, yeah. So if I take the goth night that is going on here in town every month, they're quite mixed. You can, like, from Joy Division all the way to VNV Nation and Rammstein, and also those medieval rock bands like subcultures, and so you will hear it all in one night. But what annoys me a bit is that, of course, if you have to mix it all together, you stick with the hits. And
right.
What basically got me into the idea of DJing, even before I got asked, was like, couldn't you do a club night where you don't just play the hits all the time? Because I always, I'm a classic, I'm one of those guys who listens to full albums. So so my favorite track might not necessarily be the single they put out.
Yeah, that's one of the things I did when I was DJing, which wasn't for a long time. It was for a much smaller and closer knit scene. But when someone would ask for one of the big hits, I would play something off of the same album by the same band that I really like. And I'd throw on the hit every once in a while, but I would not play the same hit every week because I didn't like playing the same tracks every week. I'd try to, all right, I played that track last week.
I'm trying to avoid that too. Yeah.
So yeah, I do like I find DJing, at least from my mindset, and it sounds like you're not that dissimilar, is sort of a fine line balance between you're trying to introduce new music and keep the scene alive with fresh new voices and new things while still being comforting and giving the fans what they want.
Yeah, that's a fine line. I actually got really told off by some guy once because I was in fact, he was asking for Joy Division and I had the nerve not to play Love Will Tear Us Apart.
That's one Joy Division song I almost never play, just because
exactly.
It's not my favorite song in the world, but I'm especially sick of it too.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I think a lot of in Chicago, I think we had the same problem a few years ago, but a little before the pandemic, I think it was changing because there were so many new bands releasing music that the DJs were starting to play the new stuff, because I did get sick of going out and just hearing the same songs over and over. It's not fun. I don't think.
Exactly.
I think that's also why Sarah started doing the Le Petit Mort thing as well, since that is exclusively, I mean, it's primarily goth, so not a lot of industrial, but exclusively goth released after 2000. She will not play anything prior to 2000, no matter who requests it or what they're requesting.
I know Alex of postpunk.com.
Oh yeah, Alex.
He lived in I think he lived in Berlin for a while, and he's talked about how much he likes that scene over there.
Yeah, I think
like the music scene.
I think Berlin is still a bit different from the rest of Germany anyway, because it's a bit like London and the rest of the UK. You get so much going on in London, and if you drive 1 hour out of London, there's nothing anymore.
Right.
And
yeah.
Of course, Berlin's club scene is notorious. So you got something going on pretty much. I mean, you have club nights like at the Dunker Club that are going on a Monday night for I think 30 years now, and which would be impossible in any other city.
Don't they also have like club nights that start on Saturday and go till Monday?
Yeah, that's more the techno scene, I guess.
Yeah, no, I know it's more the electronic scene, but I know they do have clubs
they do.
over 24 hours.
And also, usually in Germany, when you have like a normal club night, they will start at usually 9 o'clock or something, maybe 10. In Berlin, it doesn't make sense going out before midnight. Usually club nights, they just open the doors at 11, and if you show up before 1, you might be the only one.
It's not that dissimilar from Chicago. Chicago's a lot like that too, although the clubs are open at 10 or 11.
Yeah, and then they go on until 7 in the morning or so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, at the club where I did, they had to finish at 4.
I do want to, it's interesting because you mentioned the way that people talk about Vegete, and I know a lot of Americans have this romanticized envy of the German goth scene because they see those big festivals and they see that there's like physical clothing stores and there's, Spontus and stuff like that. And there's, I don't know if Viona Art does it anymore, but they used to have, I think it was Schloss Heinrichshorst. I think they had like vampire events.
Yeah, and the Victorian picnic and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I assume the fewer people go out during the rest of the year. Is it kind of like where people talk about Whitby Gothic Weekend and they say, oh, it's just people that dress up for the event, but they don't care about the goth scene kind of thing, or is it not?
I think you will have the same people at Vegete too. The what I call them carnival goths, you just dress up, just for some kind of carnival. But actually, what I will always say is basically, as long as they treat others with respect, and so who cares? There's just people there, and I don't have to talk to them if I don't want to. And also, I mean, Vegete is an event unlike any other, I always say, because it's not like 20,000 people standing in a field watching bands, which is basically what Mera Luna is. It's on an airfield.
Yeah.
But it's like a city-wide club festival. So if I don't like the band playing in one club, I can go to the next one and see another band. And I usually, when they start naming the bands that will play, I will listen to the bands and make a list of bands that interest me. And when they release the timetable about 2 weeks prior to the event, I will see what I can do. And they got quite good in putting the right bands together in one club per night, at least. That was different when I first went in 1999. I had to do lots of changes between venues, and just eating up your day. You spent more day on the tram than actually seeing bands in the end. So what I'm trying to do is, which are the bands that I really, really, really want to see? Where are they playing? Who's playing with them? And usually it makes a good program then. Of course, you will miss half the bands that might interest you because there's just too many. I remember in 2019, I think I had a list of more than 50 bands that I would have liked to see.
Oh, my God.
And I ended up, I think I saw 21 in the end, which is, I think, pretty much the best you can do in 4 days.
Yeah. Do any of the clubs there have dress codes?
At Vegete, of course, the Obsession Bizarre, the fetish party, does have some kind of. So like me, usually doing like in just black jeans and some random band shirts would not be enough to get in there. There are a couple of clubs that won't let you in with just like blue jeans and trainers, probably. But not that I know of. Maybe in some other cities, actually. Because some venues that I've DJ'd in were more or less like punk venues, and they are just like everybody's welcome anyway.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, it's interesting because I think some places here try to have some kind of dress code because then it keeps people out from, going to see the freak show and starting fights and getting drunk.
Indeed, I think it depends on which area the club is in. If they are a bit outside in some industrial area, so the people have to go there because they want to go there. So you won't have many people just popping in to see the freaks or something.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be its own gatekeeping, unlike the places that are in the area where people are just bar hopping, going from club to club and drinking.
Exactly. I think in some inner city venues that have maybe bad experience with some drunk people showing up, they might have dress codes. Yeah.
Do you actually? Now that I'm thinking about clubs, are there a lot of younger people that go out to goth events? Because people under 30, I guess, or is it mostly? Because that's usually a good sign that the scene is healthy if newer kids are.
That's a good point actually, because I noticed that at a lot of events, if you look at the audience, be it gigs or club nights, you see that it's the same people going there for 20 years, and they're just growing old together, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And I always try to create an atmosphere that is welcoming for younger people too, because some of the older goths are very elitist. Like, okay, what do you know about this band or that? You haven't seen Joy Division live or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I always hated this because I remember when I moved into the town where I'm living now, I was already almost 30. And but people didn't know me. So they were confused because there was a new face that didn't act like someone who was new to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because I went out in Hamburg for a couple of years before I moved here. So I knew my way around goth clubs, but I just haven't been at theirs.
Right.
And actually, I enjoyed that a bit, to confuse people like this. I'm so mean sometimes. So, and I noticed that some people were like really talking shit about the younger people from other cities. And I thought, why? We're not so many people to be able to be that hostile towards each other if you want to keep the scene alive. So I always had at my club nights, there were a lot of younger people coming, especially when this whole death rock hype came up in the early 2000s. There were like these, as they could sometimes call them here, the Batcave kids.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mind because they were nice and they had a genuine interest in the music. And I didn't want to end up like those club nights. I remember when I was a teenager, there was just one club in town that was just almost entirely frequented by people over 50 to dance to like 1950s, 1960s music.
Right.
And I thought I never want to make the goth night end up like looking like this, where all the old people are going.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when I go to like this generic goth night here in town, there are a couple of younger people, but of course it's more like EBM-ish. So it's but there are still younger people going out. Yeah. At gigs it's a bit different. I think at concerts it depends on who's playing. If you go see like in 2011 I went to see Peter Hook in Manchester, and I had a look around and thought, okay, there's a big portion of the audience that might actually have seen Joy Division live.
Yeah.
but of course that was Peter Hook in Manchester. That was maybe it's special.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, and also if you're new, you probably don't know who Peter Hook is anyway.
Yeah, but I think that's not even a shame, because, I mean, it's not a contest. I agree. I'm still discovering great bands from the 1980s now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen some live streams Twitch streams where I'm like, wow, this sounds amazing. What band is this? And it's some band that made, one album 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I never heard of it.
Yeah, but also I think those people who feel like they're some kind of superior just because they know this and that band that put out one EP on cassette in a 20 edition in 1982 that gave it out by hand or something, it means nothing. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the good thing is these days with the internet and platforms like Bandcamp or so, you have such an easy access to so much music. Yeah. That's actually harder to keep up than finding something.
Yeah. Well, so what about Twitch DJing then? Because I'd be interested to hear what your experience with that has been like. And because when it first started, I thought, oh, this is great. Everyone from all over the world can talk to different parts of the scene. But I wonder if maybe that's not the case. I don't know.
I never actually thought about doing live streams until the pandemic struck. And it was on the 13th of March last year. It was the first time that I didn't go to a gig. I think it didn't even get cancelled, but I thought, no, that's just too risky at the moment. I was screaming dead in Berlin, in fact. Okay. So I thought, no, I'm not hopping on a train, go to Berlin. And right now it's just until they have figured out what this is that's going around.
Yeah.
And it was also the first I was working from home, which I've done since. So I'm working from home for more than a year now. And so I thought, well, okay, I was doing like sometimes I was uploading 1 hour sets on Mixcloud, like my monthly top 15 or something. And I thought, well, okay, why not just doing a little longer set? And so I did audio streaming only on a platform called livesets.com for a while, for about like 1.5 months or so. And I was just mentioning like, okay, my cat is just sitting here next to me. And somebody suggested, oh, you got a cat, you have to be on video too.
Yeah, we have to see it.
So in the end, it was my cat that made me go on Twitch. So yeah, and then I tried Twitch, and of course, when you start, you have like 20 people listening or so, or watching in that case. And I found out that for a long time, I had no people from Germany in the chat on my streams. No one from Germany at all. There was one German, but he lives in Texas. Alex from Hallowed Hearts, in fact. So that's actually how I got to know him. And then, of course, some other DJs watching me then, and I watch them in return. So it starts with DJs watching each other. And by now it seems, or my perception is that Twitch has created a whole new community. So what is like the goth community in some town? There is another town called Twitch now, which has its own community. And just as in any bigger town, you have like the big parties playing all the hits and crowd pleasers, and they got lots of viewers, and you got like the niche parties where the DJ is happy if he has 20 people listening. I think it's basically Twitch can be regarded as a separate town now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think you're completely right.
And of course, you have a lot of people who just can't relate to the platform that is Twitch, because of course it's different than a club night in person.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain it to a friend recently, and they didn't really get what I'm about, because we have a different perception of what it is. Because I said, for me, Twitch was never supposed to be a replacement for a club night. Never. For me, it was like the missing link between a club night in person and a radio show, which is just someone sending stuff without getting any feedback.
Right.
So it has the radio component where you can just talk about music and like play some more obscure stuff without the need to fill the dance floor. while at the same time getting the immediate feedback on the chat. And that made it very interesting for me to because I'm a bit of a music geek actually. So that's why I'm doing like band specials and stuff like that, where I can look at this band in depth and say, okay, this member of this band has played in this band and play a track from them, and so to make it interesting. Because I think if I would just have try to replicate a club night on Twitch twice a week or so, what I'm doing in my streams, I would have got bored almost a year ago probably. Because just moving what you're playing on a club night to Twitch probably won't work.
No, not in general. It doesn't have the same feeling, the same vibe. Exactly.
And some people are trying this with parallel Zoom parties where they have the Twitch stream running and go on Zoom, but it's still not the same.
It's still not the same.
That might replace those people that go to club night and end up sitting in some corner where the music's not too loud and having a talk over a beer or so.
Yeah.
But it can never replace a full dance floor at a club, and I think it's not supposed to.
So if Twitch is like its own separate scene, how do you think the the in-person scene is surviving now that people can't go out?
I think it's not a question of the scene is surviving, it's more the question of the clubs are surviving at the moment. Because of course they have to, most of the clubs are rented spaces, so they will have to pay their rent. Some basic energy costs will be there, some maintenance costs will be there, and all that with no income for a year now. So some of them are struggling. Some people are willing to give if some donations or so, but some clubs already have announced that they're closing. I think actually people are yearning to go out again. Even on Twitch, they all say, "Oh, I want to go out so much now." But still, listening to music and chatting with people is better than sitting around at home doing nothing.
Yeah.
So people want to go back to clubs again. It's not that Twitch is any threat to the clubs. So I think maybe clubs will close now, which is a shame. I mourn every club that's closing, but I think when we can open up again, there might be new clubs opening as well. Because
I think it's going to be more of a reset on the club scene. There's going to be new clubs coming up, things shifting around, new venues, but it's not going to die. The impulse is still there.
Yep, absolutely. So I think there will be people that maybe like DJs who lost their club because it was closing, maybe getting together with 2 or 3 other DJs and either opening a new club themselves or looking for another club. Because there's still so many people who want to do things.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I've spent a lot of time at home thinking about, is how I didn't realize how important community is for me. Not just because for feeling lonely, but just for my sense of self, like who I am as a person, who I am as a goth. I feel like I need to be in a space with other people also experiencing those things. It's gotten so bad for me that when I take my dogs out for a walk, I say hello to the people that I walk past just because I don't have anyone to talk to.
And actually, at the supermarket, you start small talk with the cashier just to talk to someone.
Yeah.
Absolutely, totally here, because I mean, I live alone just with my cat. She's not so good at talking back to me.
Yeah.
Mine scream at me in the morning for food, but that's about it. I mean, it's the community part is something I had thought about in a different way, because I'm like a solitary pagan practitioner, and so I don't have I have felt disconnected from like a broader pagan community, but I always had my my Goth family, like the people I saw when I went out. And not having those interactions, I never realized how hard it is, for me at least, to maintain a relationship over the internet. Because when I go to a club or a concert or something like that, I have that time set aside. So there's no distractions or emergencies. I don't have to think about work.
That's true.
And it's harder for me to make that time to message people, or even just to feel like an emotional connection through chats, not being face to face. So I think I've just realized for my mental health that being isolated and away from my community has been, not very good. And like I think early on in the podcast when we were talking about Twitch streaming, I was asking that question, like when clubs reopen, maybe Goths won't want to go out anymore because they can stay at home. Maybe they have a live feed from the club or something. But I've changed my mind on that, I think, because I'm really craving being in this place where everybody constructs this experience together. And it's kind of for me, it's kind of like a secularized ritual, I guess, because we construct this place, this is this sort of temple, and we have communion together doing this thing. And I really miss that.
In fact, the first club where I DJ was made up like a temple from the inside with columns and. Oh
wow, that's fantastic!
It was even called Temple X. So. Actually, the family who ran it wanted to create a special. It was an old cinema, and they wanted to create it was made up as a techno club, and it didn't take long until the first guy went to techno night and thought that should be a goth club. So they they ended up having goth and metal nights as well. No, so. But you're right. Basically, everybody's telling me how much they miss meeting people in real life in a club, and can't wait to get out again. And so I think Twitch might be a nice addition to the club scene. Maybe even with live streams from the club for people that used to listen to the DJs from another continent or so. And in fact, people have asked me already if what I would will do after the pandemic, and I said, well, of course I will continue maybe streaming just once a week or so, or maybe every other week. But also the idea of doing also a live stream from a club for just people from somewhere completely else is intriguing. Yeah. Of course, it depends on the internet connection you will have in a club.
Right. Yeah.
That's the main thing, probably.
I know. Well, I mean, I think I've seen some clubs that have done unique events at the club, and then you have to go to their website and pay them for a ticket. I think it's mostly like fetish stuff.
Yeah.
But I have seen some places do something like that, which I think is interesting too.
It's interesting. I'm actually not a friend of paid DJ streams, because frankly, I'm sitting here at home playing some music on my laptop at night, and I don't have any expenses basically. Actually, I think it was in my second Twitch stream or so when somebody asked me for where's your tip link, and until that moment, the idea had never crossed my mind, because I mean I have my day job, so I'm not dependent on getting money from Twitch. And it was like, oh wait, you actually want to send me money? Why? So I was genuinely confused. I mean, of course, it feels nice if people appreciate it. So I always say, okay, if you want to send a tip or cheers on Twitch, it's appreciated. But I'm not in here for the money.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the nice things about the Goth community is that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with making money from running an event or anything like that. Yeah. But I think most people don't do it because they think they're going to be able to not even get rich, but just live off of that income. I think they do it because they love the scene and they love the people and they want to provide something for them.
Even a lot of bands are they have their day jobs and the band is a hobby, which sometimes annoys me because when you see how people are treating the bands as like they're expecting them to be full-time musicians, putting an album out at least every year, but also not being willing to spend any money on that band. That always annoyed me a bit because I'm always trying to see both sides. So no, but what you mentioned earlier, that like this being isolated thing, and not being able to, or not, that it feels weird to connect to people only via the internet. I've had a job for 11 years, from 2005 to 2016, that had a 3-hour commute each way.
Oh,
so so my life was getting up at 5:30 in the morning, enter the bus at 6:15, and coming back home at 8:45 at night, just having some dinner and go back to bed.
Yeah.
So I was pretty used to being connected only via the internet already. And the other thing is, I really love to travel. And for that job, I had a rail card, which allowed me free traveling throughout Germany. So I sometimes just went to Munich for a club night, and which resulted in having a lot of friends in different cities.
Right, yeah.
Of course, the internet is the best way to stay connected. So, and also I'm working as a web developer, so being online is pretty much part of my life. So all these factors came together to make the transition to Twitch easy for me, I think.
Yeah. Before COVID, I was maybe going out once a month, I think. I didn't, just because I have a lot of things going on in my life. And that's why I think I was surprised how important that once a month thing was to me. When I was younger, when I was a kid, I would spend a lot of time, and we had the internet, but it wasn't the internet, the early internet. I spent a lot of time going to local shops or venues that were run by punks or goths, where just everybody would go because you go out of the house, you have nothing else to do. And those were so important to my sort of understanding what a subculture was. Like the one example I used on Facebook was this place in, it was in Decatur, Illinois, which is just this tiny town that had this massive soy factory, which was where most of the jobs were. So everything always smelled like soy because it was like throwing smoke into the air. And there was this 3-story huge building on the corner of one of the main roads that was painted all black. And then it had a big sign that said Church of the Living Dead on the outside.
Nice.
And there was they even like built a fake cemetery in the lot at one point. And for me, it was so cool for me as a kid because, it was technically a church because it was run by a Christian Goth. And when I was a kid, I was a Christian, but because it was the only alternative place, everybody would go there. So, it was atheists and pagans and everybody. And that ability, they had a coffee shop at one point. The guy who owned it lived in the building. So I would spend weekends there sometimes, sleep in the basement. And then they had a stage on the 3rd floor where they had people would tour. It was mostly industrial bands like Crook Shadows, and I think Voltaire played there, and like synth pop bands and stuff. But you could sleep over and then get up and get ready and go to a show the next night. And then, during the day, you just sat around, listen to music, smoke cigarettes, do all like the crazy stuff you do as a kid. And maybe being in pandemic mode has made me really romanticize this kind of thing. But this sort of because I love clubs, but it's different than that kind of thing because you have more interaction with people. It's more community focused, and actually, I think a lot of Wave Gothic Treffen stuff is community focused because, like you were saying, it's not just concerts. There's people coming together and talking and spending time together.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been reading the Phantom's Death Rock book, and there was a place in California called Toxic Shock where all the LA death rock people would hang out and do drugs and listen to music. And it was basically the same thing where you had that collaboration. People would start bands, do art projects. So yeah, that communal experience is really, I think, for me at least, an important part of the goth subculture and something that I don't think people talk about enough. People talk about music and fashion and books and stuff like that, but people don't talk about coming together to experience something very much.
But I think that's because it's such a part of our usual daily life, just hanging out with friends. We only appreciate it now that it's not there. I remember when I was a teenager, we had a little like some like youth cultural center, which was more or less almost next to my school, where I went for the last few years of school, and so usually my day was just going to school and then going over to hang out there for the afternoon with some metalheads and punks, and I think one guy was more a bit like on the borderline between general alternative, and he liked some goth music too. So he actually introduced me to Fields of the Nephilim back then.
Oh wow, very cool. Yeah, that's really like a crossover kind of band.
Yeah. So so we were just like hanging out there, drinking and playing like some table football or something. And I think those things are actually where subcultures are born, because I've read a book about the post-punk scene of the late 1970s, mainly in England, and if you look at it, there was always like some spaces where there's all the weirdos hang out, and that's where ideas get born. There was about some place in Sheffield where it ended up bringing bands like Cabaret Voltaire and the Human League. They all hung out together at the same place, which wasn't even a club, which was just a place to hang out.
Yeah, it was just like little art collectives. Some people were living there, some people were squatting there, some people just had little shops there.
Yeah, same in Berlin sometimes with some bands.
Yeah. Well, I just watched last night B-movie Lust and Sound in West Berlin, and somebody in there said that you have basically a group of people that play music and then they just make thousands of bands and everybody plays in everybody else's band. So it's just everybody doing stuff together.
Yeah, I mean the LA death rock scene was quite the same.
Yeah. Well, let me. You mentioned Fields of the Nephilim, which made me think of this question. Because I wanted to talk about music a little bit, and there's this thing about specific bands in Germany that's always been interesting to me. The sort of mixing of genres. That's something that bands that don't get played in America, and a lot of them are kind of the bands I might see at Mara Luna. So like Mono Inc. and Die Krups and Unheilig, ASP, even like Diary of Dreams. It seems like there's these really popular. These bands are really popular with goths, I guess. Yeah. But they don't sound like, they're not gothic rock, you know. Even when I was younger, I would get that compilation from German. I think it was Extreme Traumfanger or something like that. And it was completely different than American comps, I would get like Dancing Ferret Records and what else? Unquiet Grave, and the music on the German comps were so much more diverse, and there was more like traditional rock and roll, and they would mix other genres in. Is that still like? Are those bands still really popular?
They are. Largely, festivals like Mirror Luna, they pretty much have a rotating list of headliners that play like every 2 or 3 years. And they still have like Diary of Dreams, Mono Inc., every band you mentioned there. And I think that there might be interesting bands to get people to have a closer look at what other goth bands maybe, although I would never count them as goth bands exactly,
right?
Because they're just like rock pop bands that are using goth elements, be it musically or in style,
right? It's just always been a little weird to me. I didn't know if it was more of a German thing, or maybe I just didn't understand who the audience was for those bands.
Actually, I think it might be from the bands. It might be a German thing, but I know a lot of UK people who love them.
Oh, okay.
So they're actually coming to Germany to some festivals to see those bands. I think one thing is that from the early 1990s on, you had 3 big music magazines going around here in Germany that you could buy at pretty much every station bookstore. One was Zillow, which started the Zillow Festival, which later became Mirror Luna. Then you had the Sonic Seducer and Orcus.
Yeah, I've got both of them.
Those 2 are still going, I think. And they actually have, by taking bands like Nightwish or so on the front pages, they have opened up some goth genres more to influences from the outside world, maybe, or getting people interested in goth that were just more into like symphonic metal before.
Right.
And then they made, they're having an article on Nightwish, so I'm buying this magazine and then discovering some other bands maybe.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good thing.
Which is, it's generally a good thing. And also, another thing here in Germany is that, I don't know if it's a German thing or international even, you have just to have one band in having a certain style that is getting successful commercially. So, this band is selling a lot of albums, and you will have like 3 or 4 other bands, usually by other labels, being pushed that are similar. So like if you have a band like ASP, you will have a band called then Unheilig comes up, and Mono Inc., and they're not so different from each other.
Right.
You have Subcultures Sally, then you have suddenly you have bands like Saltatio Mortis or something that are similar, but probably by another label to have another piece of the cake.
Right. I was just wondering, are there many new German goth bands there? Because like I mentioned earlier, there are so many new bands putting out goth and post-punk and darkwave, but I don't hear many new German bands, and I don't know if that's just me or what.
They are a couple. Funnily enough, many new German bands are actually just people from other older bands. One goth rock band I like very much at the moment here from Germany is a band called Swedermengard. Then you have like also like the dark goth rock style Aeon Sable, but they're going around for several years already.
Oh yeah, Aeon Sable. Yeah, I forgot about them. Yeah.
Then you have some bands that are just coming back that were active in the 1990s, like bands like Still Patient, that are quite active again.
Okay, I haven't heard of that band, so I'm gonna look them up.
Yeah, they were just more or less. I don't know if they were so well known in the '90s, but they had a few good tracks there, and now they're back again. And I saw them actually at Wave Gothic Travel, I think in 2013 for the first time, and I really liked them a lot. So. And then you have really new upcoming bands like darkwave bands like La Sculptra.
Yeah, I love them.
Then so there are a couple of German bands coming up. Yeah, definitely.
Very good.
But of course, compared to bands from the States or UK, maybe where the scene is much bigger. From my perception, at least. Or at least you have more bands.
Yeah.
It might seem like, okay, there's not much coming out of Germany at the moment.
You did bring up the sort of medieval scene, and I know for me, less neo-medieval, more neoclassical was really popular in the US around maybe 2008, 2009, kind of after the death rock revival, where people were, Helium Vola, Corvus Corax, Lacrimosa, Quintal, Fauna, Stampy, all those bands. Like for me, when I discovered those bands, that was this magical sound that I fell in love with. But I know Daniel Chayan came out with a new album a few days ago, but I wonder, is that scene still big there? Because I don't see a lot of that happening.
I think it is in a way. So bands like Corvus Corax or Sabbath Sally, they still get a big audience.
Okay.
And also when I look at some Goth nights, they get played a lot, at least here in the area. I mean, for me, I saw Corvus Corax first in 1992, playing at a medieval market fair, which are quite a thing here in Germany during the summer.
Okay. Still.
Of course, when you take a closer look, not much about it is genuine, like authentical anyway. I've done that myself for about 2.5 years until I thought, okay, it's just not worth the effort, the money, and the time I'm putting into it.
Right.
I met a couple of interesting people there, though, and I was actually, some of those bands started at bands on those medieval market fairs, like Corvus Corax, like In Extremo. And then, of course, you have the other bands that started from a more classical background, like Quintal. Well, I mean, of course, Ernst Horn also being part of Daniel Lacaille.
Yeah.
And so you have from dark wave to neoclassical stuff. I think it's fluid. It's not a hard line between this.
Right. Yeah.
And then you have the theatrical bands like Goethes Erben, who I might not prefer to listen at home so much, but what they do put on a good live show. So I have seen them live, I think 3 times or so, and they do put on a good show. I'll give them that. Also, if it's might not be my favorite kind of music, I do love bands like Dead Can Dance, though.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is you have that's coming, still coming, is bands from Scandinavia, like Vadruna, like Heilung. Putting all this Norse mythology stuff and the traditional Scandinavian music elements into it, which is also interesting.
Yeah, that does. I think that is more popular now than what I was getting into in college, which seemed really popular, was the Victorian, like the dress, the clothing, and the music sort of aesthetic. I think the Norse pagan stuff is more popular now.
Yeah. I even saw a band from the Czech Republic. One of the few gigs I saw last year. Went to Prague Gothic Travel in August, in fact, because the Czech Republic had very few cases until they had a very strict lockdown in spring last year. So they had very few cases in summer, and they opened up. So even festivals were possible up to, I think, 500 people or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second wave hit them full on in autumn. So I know they declared a high risk area even.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went there in August to see a couple of bands. Clan of Zymox were playing. Who else? Actors were playing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, was it Actors? Or was Actors here? I'm going there every year, so I might get confused. Oh no, Actors were the year before. Frank the Baptist were playing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And several other bands, some local bands as well. One project from Slovakia I liked a lot called Love My Science, like electropunk stuff.
Okay.
Very, a lot of fun. And there was a band also from Prague called Nemur that also did like this Norse pagan. They were singing in Old Norse, and they were really good actually. I liked them a lot. So this is a thing that's definitely going on at the moment.
I'm sorry if I'm talking over you, Trey. I get excited and I don't pay attention to what's going on. But if you have anything you wanted to say, interrupt me. It's fine.
I've been speaking up where I felt
good.
I needed to.
Good.
So no, you're fine.
Okay. Do you want to tell a story about your childhood too?
No, not really.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's see. What did I want to bring up then? Oh yeah. I think one of the questions I like to ask people from other countries is just how you're treated as an alternative person, as a goth in your city, how that's viewed kind of culturally.
So I think here in Germany, in bigger cities, people just really don't care. Because usually you will have some university or so where people are more into any alternative scene. You will have the metalheads, punks hanging around. So when you see someone in goth, full goth dress up or so, they might just look, but that's pretty much it. It's certainly different in the rural areas, but I suppose that's the same in every country. The more out in the country you get, the more conservative the people are. So there actually are still people living in some smaller villages telling me that they still get called Satanists and everything like this. So this is still a thing.
Well,
nothing much has changed there in the last 30 years.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much I usually hear those things that like in Europe, it's more socially acceptable to look different ways. You maybe it's not as hard to get a job or things like that, where there's more moral values attached to that kind of thing in America, for example.
Yeah, that's true. Probably, yeah.
I have read a couple things about, I guess you could call it moral panics okay, so I wrote this down, but I'm going to completely mispronounce this. But one was in Saxony in Goldstahlbruch. I think that's how you say it. Probably not. There was apparently a goth suicide location and rumors about occult and satanic rituals in Brandenburg. I don't know if you've heard of any of that.
Yeah, it wasn't in the news here, actually. I
really?
remember vaguely.
Was that like a long time ago?
I think it was a few years ago, yeah.
Okay.
What the thing is that the press sometimes makes up a goth connection where there is none. Right.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
I think it's a bit the same with some of the mass shootings at some schools in the US.
Okay. Yeah.
Where just because the guys who were wearing a leather coat or some, there must be some goth relation.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been the case with this as well.
Okay.
Because frankly, I've never heard of anybody being anything like some suicide cult or something.
No. Yeah.
That's usually just some. They might have just dressed up black and people said, okay, the dress black equals goth or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I mean. That's I don't expect to be the press to be any expert on that. So
yeah. All right. Well, what about because the big hot topic that a lot of people are arguing about right now is political issues and social issues, and whether they should be part of the goth scene or not. So I want to hear what your opinion is, and then also maybe from your perspective, if that is shared with, in broader Germany and the goth scene there, how they feel.
Of course, as you can imagine, this is a really hot topic, especially in Germany, for several reasons. And the thing is, in Germany, like just the same as in other countries, the far right is on the rise a bit for a moment.
Yeah.
They have been there all along, but it just cooked up a bit when the civil war in Syria broke out and people were fleeing to Germany for safety.
Yep.
And
there was
people
a lot of things around that.
And you had actual politicians arguing that it can't be so worse because the people arriving here had mobile phones.
Yeah.
And to which one newspaper asked a very clever question, said, okay, they went into a primary school and asked the children, if you would have to leave here now, what would you take with you? And the first thing that those little children said, my phone, to stay in touch with my family. So that was a very clever question. No, so it's a very sensitive topic that's been discussed for as long as I can think, actually. And while some people are going a bit over the top to equal a certain style of music with a certain political orientation, I can't say just because it sounds like this, it's that political corner. Like just because it's neofolk, it's not automatically right wing. Maybe I should listen to the lyrics then before I call out anything or anyone. I should get my facts straight. Basically, I don't like calling out anyone without research.
Yeah.
What I think is the whole goth subculture is an offspring of the punk subculture, and basically most of any right-wing mindset will not, or at least not for a long time, tolerate diversity.
Yeah.
So for me is that being in a subculture and being right-wing are exclusive to each other.
Yeah.
It just can't be. For me, it just doesn't work. And the problem is sometimes that a lot of Goths, they are renowned for being so one of the most peaceful scenes. There have been technical problems at Goth festivals that led to bands cancelling or so, and people didn't start writing, which would be unimaginable at any bigger pop gig.
Yeah.
So they are renowned for being so peaceful and tolerant because you have all the freaks, and so you don't. Many people don't judge too quickly just because someone looks weird or so.
Right.
Which of course made it interesting for some people to set foot in. And this tolerance sometimes went a bit too far to say, okay, the singer might be a right-winger, but I still like his music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can understand that from one angle. But on the other hand, I mean, in the end, if I'm buying the records, or even if a DJ, I play them in a club, because the royalties, of course, will go there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I will give them money.
Yeah.
Do I want to support these people? That's a question everybody has to ask themselves. For me, it is when I read something about somebody being a member of this or that, I would try to back check it.
Mm-hmm.
I just I will just try not to just share something somebody mentioned on Facebook.
Yeah,
because then you will get just drive into some kind of witch hunt mindset. And no, sorry, I'm out of that. But if the facts are still there after I checked, I would just say, okay, I'm not just making a big drama. I would just not play them anymore.
Right. Okay.
Because if you make a big deal of it, they will get a lot of publicity, maybe even with the wrong people who will then buy the records just because of it.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm just saying, okay, that's going out of my playlist then. And the other thing is, I came across a neofolk band in the early 2000s from Eastern Germany called Dies Natalis, and I was running a website in the late 1990s, Pagans Against Nazis, here in Germany, and I was talking about them, about like paganism and right wingers and all the stuff that's connected there, and they loved the idea of this website, and so they were clearly not right wingers. They came out of the punk scene, in fact, and they had a tour scheduled. They rented a tour bus and equipment and everything they needed, and then just venue after venue canceled their gigs because they were sometimes threatened by some more radical Antifa people. And while I'm strictly Antifa, I think a witch hunt, especially towards the wrong people, is the worst you can do. You still have to try to keep a clear mind and say, okay, let's have a closer look at these people. But I talked to someone and he said, yeah, they're making neofolk, and neofolk is right wing. And that's of course it's just bullshit. Forgive me, excuse me, my French.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I mean, that's the same thing that says, oh, the kid in black who shut up the school is a goth because he's wearing black. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
All Goths are Satanists.
Yeah.
The same. So what I'm trying is, I'm not expecting everybody to know every single detail about people behind every band, festival, or stuff. You just can't. It's just impossible. But if somebody comes up with some facts that would make it impossible for me to support someone, I would just draw my conclusions then.
Yeah. What about because there was this photo that went around a lot, maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago. I think it was from Gothic Pogo, but it was up at the door and it said something like no racism, no transphobia, no sexism. I know that, or I think that Gothic Pogo works with Distance, which is like a queer DJ collective.
Yep.
So is that something that is common in German clubs where they have rules like that, or is it just their thing?
It's the thing. A sticker you will probably find at most punk venues anyway.
Oh, okay.
Because they have a strict policy. Everybody's welcome, but if you break one of those simple rules, you just get thrown out, which is just consequent. So basically, the venue where I'm DJing in Hanover is part of it's actually two venues in one building, and next to it is some art collective and stuff like this. So it's a very alternative place, and very punk place, in fact. So we had some issues or it was a bit new to me for the first night, because they had a strictly everybody can come in policy. So of course we had some people like from I think I talked to one, and he was in fact from Syria, some refugees who just wanted to have a night out.
Yeah,
and we're looking for a place where they are welcome, even though they might not exactly need the music, but to be around people.
Yeah,
and And I always think, okay, that's okay, as long as they behave.
Right.
And that's not just because they're refugees or not part of the scene, but that goes for everyone.
Yeah.
And in fact, for during the following couple of months, there were several people. We had thrown out one of them because he was actually trying to dance close to a girl, even though she was trying to get away. So we had him. He got one warning. Second warning was he was escorted out of the building. And we had the same another way around, where we had a guy trying to start a fight with him because he didn't look like he did. The Goth guy was thrown out because racism is not to be tolerated.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I think it gets a little complicated here sometimes, because I mean, obvious stuff like that, where if a woman is being, I mean, not all, like some of the bigger events, that stuff doesn't always get caught here. And I think it gets a little complicated too when people are, if it's somebody that everybody knows, it takes longer and it's harder to get them out of the scene if they're an abuser, because they're just like, oh, they're nice to everybody. And
that's true.
So
that's
I think
true.
we still have some problems like that. But I really liked seeing that as a statement of like, here, this is what this club is about, and we won't tolerate these things, you know?
Yeah, and that's just basically the same statement that the Gothic Pogo does, and many of smaller venues, in fact, do. Of course, at the bigger festivals, the more difficult it gets, because it will be lost in the crowd. And of course, as you said, the bigger someone's name is in the scene, the more people would come to their defense when you actually find out something.
Trey, have you ever seen any kind of flyer or sign like that's explicitly saying, you know, no homophobia, no racism?
That I can think of. I can't think of any particular event ads or flyers here that laid that out. I've known some places that have that as just sort of an unwritten rule, and will kick people out for that, but not anything that's been, you know, posted in a prominent location. But I'm also not necessarily looking for that most of the time too. So it's possible I've seen it and just thought, oh, cool, glad that's there, and just it was just sort of one of those things I almost assumed sometimes too.
Right. Well,
especially since a lot of, at least historically, a lot of the goth clubs I've been to have also been in gay clubs.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an unwritten, no homophobia, because this is where they're at.
I think it's really a thing that comes from the more punk side of goth, because they share the same club, and they take their spirit into the goth nights that the people are doing, like Gothic Pogo, for example. You have a lot of punk influence there, and while other goth nights, they still have like half naked girls on their flyers. I think it's I think it's a thing that comes in from the punk scene, in fact, because the punk scene, and especially in cities like Berlin, you have a strong connection between the punk and the queer scene too. They share the same venues and organize parties in some squats and.
I mean, the reason I like that the sign is up is because it's that kind of that idea where if you don't talk about those things, and Trey, you said it's assumed, and I think it is assumed, but then if you don't talk about those issues, then people start to sneak in, and they start to normalize thinking bigoted views is okay in the goth scene, and you have people like Black Goths starting to talk about how there are all these problems with goth being associated with whiteness, or with band members being part of racist organizations and nobody really cares and that kind of thing. The idea that being apolitical allows people to come in that are going to exclude other members in a bigoted way. So that's why I like even if it's assumed, I like that the sign is there, because it's like, you know who you are. If you're here, you're not welcome here, you know?
Yeah, and it's a reminder for both the people who would potentially offend, as well as the people who are like myself, maybe assuming in an improper way.
Actually, when I do my streams, I have a little love music, hate fascism sticker in the corner.
Yeah.
And one guy actually messaged me and said, what is this? I won't come back again. And so I looked at his profile on Facebook, at least the part that was public, and found out that it was a guy from Belgium and had all those radical right-wing Belgian organizations in his like list, and said, well, yeah, okay, my life is probably better without those guys anyway.
It's like, yeah, thank you for outing yourself and removing yourself so I don't have to.
Yeah, it's like the trash taking yourself out. Yeah. So, I come from a pretty punk background due to my years, and this youth center there, which was run by punks, and so. And I actually had one experience in my early years when I started dressing in black with stickers on my jacket and stuff like that. When I was on the bus with my headphones in, and when I got off the bus, somebody, I met a friend of mine who was also sitting on the bus, but I didn't see him before.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Did you not hear that?" I said, "What?" There were actually two Nazis on a right wingers sitting behind me.
Oh wow!
Who were talking to each other about beating me up.
Oh man! Wow.
So just because I got out before them, and had my friend mentioning it, I was like, okay. And that was one of my first experiences with actually something towards aimed at me.
Yeah.
Not just at someone in general.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think one difference between the scene in the US, maybe part London, at least in the UK and Germany, is that the society is far more diverse in the US. You have far more Black people, Asian people, all kinds of people, while Germany is really 80% white.
Right. Yeah.
And the other, you might have some the Turkish people in there, or people from Poland, but they're still more or less white. And so you hardly will see any Black Goths here, which is somehow a shame, but of course understandable if you think about the percentage of Black people in Germany.
Yeah.
So as I said, my goal was always to make it a place where people feel welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's basically the same as having people visiting you at home. They are welcome as long as they behave.
Yeah.
If they don't behave, you just show them the door.
Yeah. All right. I think I have one more thing I want to ask you about, which is just kind of a strange, interesting. So I read this paper. It's from 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it was by Isabella Van Elfren, and she wrote this article about Goths from former East Germany. And she said a couple things that I wanted to get your opinion on, because I don't know. I don't know. So basically she said that being Goth for the youth in former East Germany is a way to express their nihilism or disillusionment with a bad economic situation post GDR, because she says there's less optimism for the future. So she said being Goth provides a way for people to express their melancholy. I think she used the word Weltschmerz.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that it's also the expression is more extreme because in before the wall came down, any kind of subversion could be punishable.
Oh yeah.
And so now it's more of like a expression of, being loud and being really extreme because they have that new freedom. So I wanted to ask, like, does that sound accurate? But also, is there a cultural difference between Goths in different parts of Germany?
There surely is. You have basically some different a different focus on a musical style for every region. Like you have the cities where you have a more bigger EBM crowd. You have cities where you have a more death rock crowd and stuff like that.
That makes sense.
And the other thing is, I mean, when the Berlin Wall came down, I was 20 already. So I remember even that night I went to, because I just grew up 10 miles from the border on the western side. So on that night, people were dancing on the Berlin Wall. Me and a friend went to the border. The road didn't go through there, but they had a little outlook point, so you could just climb up and wave over the fence.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time in history people on the other side were able to wave back.
Wow.
It was quite an emotional moment.
Yeah.
And, from the 1st January 1919 on, you didn't need a visa to go to Eastern Germany. Mm-hmm. So my friend and me, we went to Berlin and actually hammered a piece of the wall of ourselves, which I sadly lost during one move, moving flats in 1 year somehow. And just like 3 months later or so, I was going to punk nights in the town on the eastern side, because there was a strong punk scene in the east, and also some goths, especially in Leipzig. Leipzig was a big hotspot for goths already before the war came down. Of course, they had to take big care of not being the subject of investigation for the authorities there.
Yeah.
And in 2001, I met a DJ from Leipzig, or he was living in Dessau back then, DJ Darkland, and he, in fact, he was a bit older than me, he still is a bit older than me, and he organized illegal punk and goth nights where people where he DJ'd with cassette tapes he taped off Western radio.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because that was the only way for them to get the music.
Yeah.
So I saw him at a little festival close to Berlin, and we got to talk a little, and then I went to his club night in Dessau, which was called Gothic Pogo Party. You might have heard it.
Yeah.
And in fact, then he moved to Leipzig and continued the Gothic Pogo Party there as a I think bi-monthly night, and it went bigger and bigger. I think in 2005 or so, they actually had the big hall of Werk 2, the venue, which has an 800 capacity. So it was really big, and he also did this Gothic Pogo Party. Was it still? No, not. It wasn't a festival back then in Leipzig, where I went first in 2003. Because back then the VGT itself didn't really cater for the punky and the death rocky stuff of goth. It was just more or less, mostly was just electro parties.
Okay.
The aftershow nights were just mostly EBM and industrial stuff. Was that
when cyberpunk was really big, or cyber goth? I mean,
even before
okay.
It was just it was just a mixture of like EBM industrial and just the 80s hits. That was most of the aftershow club nights back then.
Okay.
So he started the Gothic Pogo Party on that week, and not so much as competition for, but as an addition for VGT. So people could see the bands they like and then go to the Gothic Pogo Party, so they have a party with their music.
Yeah.
And then they started booking bands, and now it's a big thing, Gothic Pogo Festival for multiple days.
Yeah.
So it just grew and grew, and I think he's not part of the team anymore. He gave it to other people now, but it's still going on. So yeah, but in fact, VGT has gotten better and better with not just booking those bands, but also with the club nights. There's a big the when we were young nights at the big one big venue is just like old school goth and death rock and post punk for 3 or 4 days. So I must admit that I haven't been to Gothic Pogo in the past years because I had so much that I wanted to see at VGT already that my calendar was full, and said, why should I pay for another festival to have even more band clashes?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like just some animosities or so. It was just like, I don't have the time for both.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that history about Gothic Pogo Party. So that's nice to hear. Yeah, that makes sense. And we have a similar thing with the music here as well, where, like LA has a history of death rock. So there's a lot of death bands from there are death rock, and Chicago has a history with industrial. So there's a lot of, it was a big industrial city for a long time, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I think you do have a certain city style.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe one thing, because we were talking about this earlier, the whole Twitch thing. What I hope for the future is that this international community we have on Twitch now, where it's not like every city has its own scene and nobody talks to the people from another city, but where you actually got people from all over the world attending basically one, not really club night, but one stream, and talking to each other, will somehow translate into friendships that are growing. Also maybe DJs that not just spinning for their friends in the next city, but maybe in another country too. So several small communities grow a bit more closer to each other, because until last year basically, I knew just a couple of like Latin American bands, for example. And then I was listening to some DJs from like Chile, from Bolivia, and they introduced me to so many great bands, and I thought, wow, because this is widely unknown here in Europe because it's just so far away. And same. I mean, I'm always interested, especially in bands that are not from the usual countries, like Central Europe, US, UK. That's pretty much it, or maybe even Mexico still, but that's what most of the people know. And my ex was from South Africa, so I went there twice and met a few people from South Africa at VGT one year. And they introduced me to some South African bands that are just great. And I'm just always interested in stuff like that. So
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting like Russian post-punk bands too.
Yeah, Russia is a big scene there. Yeah,
because you expressed liking to hear diverse styles of music, and Trey and I are very much the same. And I find that when you get outside of the typical cities that you think of, you find people doing really interesting things with the genre,
absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, I like traveling, so and I've got to know so many people from all over the world. So I've been DJing in the UK, in Italy, even on Malta, on a small island in the Mediterranean, which was a unique experience because it wasn't actually a goth fest. It was like just an all-around alternative thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was something completely different there, but it's actually makes it interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. Before we finish, can you just let everybody know, your Twitch channel, your Facebook, I don't know if you have Instagram, any of that stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm DJ Cyberpagan from Braunschweig, or if you want to pronounce it in English, it's Brunswick in Germany. I'm just DJ Cyberpagan on Facebook. DJ. I think DJ.Cyberpagan on Facebook, DJ Cyberpagan one word on Instagram, and DJ_Cyberpagan on Twitch.
Okay, perfect.
So, and it's just, if you want it all in one place, my website is just death-rock.de.
Yeah, and I will, I'll put a link in the notes for anyone.
Thank you so much.
Can follow that, yeah. And yeah, thank you so much. This was really fun. I really had a great time talking with you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, fellow Grufties, for spending time with us. I really appreciate you being here. And I hope that we could serve as a bit of a chat with a friend. As I mentioned, this COVID isolation has been affecting all of us. And I talked about some of the ways that it has been difficult for me personally. So I really hope that this podcast has continued, as I know it is for people who have reached out to me, that it has continued to be a source of comfort and a source of stability in your life, and in a chaotic and often dark situation. Speaking of COVID isolation, I recently posted a video to Patreon talking about the ways it has impacted me, specifically around death and a fear of death, which I think is something that doesn't necessarily get talked about within goth circles. We've done 3 episodes now talking with death experts, and yet the existential terror that confronting your own mortality can bring about is something that hasn't really been discussed. So I put a video up on that. We also this month released a new riff track, again featuring many of the members of the Gothquisition. This time around we took on the Craft Legacy, and that went up in April, and for May I'm hoping we can get back together again and put together a commentary track for Queen of the Damned. So if you're looking for more content, occupy your time, make you laugh, hopefully maybe even make you think, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Next month, we're returning with another special panel episode, and we're going to be discussing the history and legacy and current state of death rock. Not just a music genre, as I'm sure you're aware, but a subculture in and of itself. And to help us mine the depths of this topic, we are inviting on Kent of the 80s LA death rock band Alter de Fe, Adria of the band Tears for the Dying, Diaval Strain, who we've reviewed on this podcast before, love that band, and Oliver, who has written multiple articles about the history of death rock and is a journalist who's written for outlets like postpunk.com and Cult Nation and Bandcamp. So many people who are far more qualified and informed than I am, which I think will make for a unique episode. I used to, when I started this podcast, spend quite a bit of time at the end of the episode talking a bit about my personal life and sharing some anecdotes and thoughts. And I think as the podcast has grown over the years and become a bit more formalized, I sort of let that go because I felt like it didn't necessarily fit into the format of a tight, punchy, informative, entertaining podcast episode. And I moved some of that content to Patreon. So if I can find a bit of a middle ground here, I won't be offended if you want to turn the podcast off. I just want to share a bit of an update about myself. So a couple things to note, as you may have noticed at the beginning of this episode, if you're a longtime listener, I introduced myself as Danny Ashes. That section of the introduction has been missing for a while now, and that's because I no longer go by the Count. It was something I had to think long and hard about. The Count was a sort of nickname or persona or goth moniker that I took on many, many years ago, probably somewhere a little before 2008, 2009, when I started DJing as DJ Count. As I've said on the podcast in the past, I'm a fan of the what was generally popularized in the 90s, I think. The goth name, the sort of melodramatic, pompous, sarcastic, self-referential nicknames that goths gave themselves. And at the time, I was absolutely enamored with vampires. And that was a huge part of my life. I lived, breathed, and ate vampire lore. That sort of waned for me over the years. And as I have talked about on this podcast, discovering my gender, coming out as non-binary. If you haven't yet, I recommend going to Obscura Undead's YouTube channel and looking for the video titled Tales from the Goth Side, Danny Ashes of Cemetery Confessions on Gender and Exploration of the Self. That was an interview I did a couple months ago. It's about 2.5 hours long, where I talked about gender and sex and sexuality at some length, and did a follow-up on Patreon as well. So that is where I talked about the meaning behind the name that I chose, Danny Ashes, for myself, as I've come into a discovery of who I am and who I would like to be. So I thought that was notable, especially sort of just in the context of Cemetery Confessions as a podcast. And, I think over the years, as I've tried very hard to put an emphasis for this podcast on the broader community rather than myself, as sort of a love letter to the incredible people that are in this community, in the goth subculture, to give back to the culture that has meant so much to my life. I've really sort of stepped back from talking about myself. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I felt like this is one of those topics that is relevant to the show. And then the other thing I might mention is simply an update on my life a bit, because we started this year reverting the podcast back to 1 episode a month rather than 2 episodes a month, because as I stated, when that happened, it was simply too much for me to bear, and I was kind of falling apart at the seams. I have been going to therapy for the last probably 2 months now, because I had fallen into the deepest sort of depression and despair I'd ever experienced in my life, and even became suicidal for a time. I'm in a better place now. I'm still working through several issues. I'm still continuing to work 2 other jobs and, deal with all those personal life issues around raising a kid, being a good partner to my spouse, living in a world that is full of injustice and pain. So I don't have any immediate plans to increase the frequency of episodes. I've tried to spend more time and care in preparation of and editing and putting together the shows that are being released. And as I mentioned, I've tried to refocus a bit on Patreon content for all of you who have so generously donated your money to support this podcast. I do hope that this show will continue far into the future. I've had plans in the past, sort of pipe dreams of doing live episodes, for instance. I think at one point I had a plan to rent a funeral home for an evening to have a live Cemetery Confessions episode and then rent out limos to take us all to some goth event in Chicago after the live recording was over. And those sort of pipe dreams, I think, would be, I would love to do. I'm simply just not at a place in my life where those are possible. And I also want to ensure that I'm not burning myself out to the point where I can't do the podcast at all, because that's a possibility. I don't want this to become a burden or feel like I'm going to a 9-to-5 job that I hate, right? This is a passion project. I think when I started my YouTube channel, not the Cemetery Confessions YouTube channel, my personal YouTube channel, in 2013, I wanted to create a place to put content where I could talk about sort of all of the sociological research that I had read on Goth and to share my perspective, right? Everybody wants to talk about how they define Goth or what a Goth lifestyle is, or, take on those questions. Why are you so fascinated with the macabre? Is Goth still a subculture? That kind of thing. But I realized through doing that, this was back when YouTube still had reply videos as a thing, that what made the community on YouTube special was the collaboration and the conversation, the dialogue, the dialectical nature of that community. And so from the second episode of Cemetery Confessions, it became a show where myself, a co-host, and other people came on to talk about Goth. And I know I saw value in doing that. And many of you, I think, have seen value in that type of content because you've continued to listen and you've supported us financially. So that is something that I cherish, something that started as a way to create a personal legacy, to create something about me and my own perspective, but very quickly became about all of us together. And I'm very protective of that. I'm very protective of the voice of this show. When we started the podcast, it was the only show of its kind. And since then, not only have there been many incredible shows added to the Belfry Network, but beyond that, there have been podcasts talking about subculture. Punkcast, postpunk.com put out their show, sort of these experts and larger publications, right? Punkcast is run by an associate professor of musicology. But there have also been other podcasts popping up that are just a couple friends hanging out, right? Like Goth Topic or Fake Goth Girls or Confessions of a Disney Goth, right? These are all shows that are I think harken back to the golden era of goth YouTube, where it was just a prolific amount of just scene kids talking about their experiences and just chatting, not necessarily trying to have a specific voice or to have a specific mission statement, but just to have a conversation. I think there's many factors that have gone into why that has happened. Part of that has just been that the scene has gotten larger, right? We have Procession Magazine. We have other zines, smaller zines popping up. Obscura Undead's putting out a zine, right? Auxiliary Magazine is running content around goth culture. There are all these new post-punk and goth and darkwave bands coming out. But I'd like to think in some small way that this podcast has had some influence on this sort of media. You know what? I take that back. I do believe that we have a technical started 6 months before the first episode of Cemetery Confessions. Now, I didn't know about that podcast at the time, but I probably shouldn't take credit for being the first of its kind when that's not true. And who knows, maybe it's very likely that there were other projects of this style that I just didn't know about. I mean, the internet is huge. It's hard to get the word out about a podcast, even though we have such great search tools. It's easy to get lost in the shuffle, right? So all that to say, this medium and this show is really important to me. I want to take care of it. I want to nurture it and make sure that it continues on. And so burnout is something that I'm trying to be more aware of. So I hope that was a little bit of a throwback to old school Cemetery Confessions, a bit of a fireside chat, if you will. And all that to say, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the time that you have spent with us and with me over the years through many iterations of the format of the podcast and my own identity as a person. We've tried many different things. I've changed my views and opinions many different times. But the goal of servicing and spotlighting the goth community, along with learning and growing, have sort of continued to be the core ethos of the show. So with all that to say, I hope to see you next month. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.